Hi everybody, I'm back again to speak with you all about some wonderful records, and today we're going to go a little bit off topic. We're going to start with a tribute to one of the important musicians of the last 50 years, and that is one and only LYLE MAYS. Lyle, it's untimely passing this week. You don't know how you're going to feel about these things when they happen, but I have to say, when I found this out, it bummed me out more than I thought. I put this record on here, which is actually a seminal, game-changing record between Pat Metheny and LYLE MAYS. And when I put this on, the tears started flying, and it just makes you realize how important a musician he was. The interesting thing is that Lyle came up through the church, born in Wisconsin. Parents were, just living ordinary lives, working ordinary jobs, but cultivated a genius son who ended up ultimately becoming trained in jazz, ended up at North Texas, was part of the legendary jazz lab band. But Lyle was more than a jazz musician, and in fact, the controversy behind Pat Metheny and LYLE MAYS is discussing the boundaries of their music. First of all, this duo is, it's almost impossible when you think that two guys could be so complementary, so visionary, so perfectly suited for one another. One is a keyboardist, one is a guitarist, both, very interesting writers, very curious, out of the box, able to push the boundaries in practically every genre of music. That being said, as time has gone along over the last 40 years, as people segue into their listening experience with LYLE MAYS and Pat Metheny, depending on where you're segueing in, you have an interpretation of where they sit and stylistically. And in a sense, that's really not fair. I think that these are trained improvisational musicians coming out of the American jazz tradition who extended themselves through the whole continuum of serious European music and then electronics and beyond, and pushed the envelope of technology to the point where not only were they esteemed by audiences throughout the world, but they're musicians, and Lyle is one of these people. And I had the good fortune of encountering him a couple times, once at length, and this is a very self-effacing, decent, quiet guy who loved playing music, and his ambitions didn't go any further than that. Just a brilliant mathematical mind, pushing the envelope in terms of finding new ways of expression. Yes, great acoustic pianist, but his subversion of technology, both him and Pat taking these technical aspects and keeping them as organic as possible, and actually editing and vetting it themselves in terms of how these sounds were going to translate over time. Is a very beautiful record, and one that really needs to be addressed by anyone who is into the Pat Metheny group, is into contemporary music of any sort, that's on the cutting edge, but not trying to be cutting edge. God bless you, Lyle. Rest in peace. Bye. So inevitably we were going to get to Cuba, the small miracle of an island, a cultural island, oppressed by the United States of America over the last 50 to 100 years. The spirit of the culture through creativity comes forth within records like this. Frank Emilio Quintet with two wonderful percussion players. Actually, there's three of them: Gustavo Tamayo, Barreto, and Tata Guinness on congas make this a very, very interesting record. Emilio, classically trained, Some of the records actually structurally early in his career are Cuban folklore with a classical kind of Cuban folklore flavor, like a lot of danzas and old European classical music coming together to shape this pianist. But in his own way, a swinger, got into improvised music and got into the montuno and the extension of Arsenio Rodriguez from the 1930s and 40s. So what you have here is a very special record, playing a beat up, almost semi-upright piano. This is a miracle record. The atmosphere in this record is astonishing. Again, Cuba being a small island, manifested so much incredible music. So many of these records are collectible, be it Panart, Egram, and Arieto, a number of the labels in Cuba at that time incubating so much amazing music. John McLaughlin once said that, fusion music, all music is fusion. And he's correct. I mean, essentially, the term fusion that we've used to integrate, improvisational American jazz music with the electronics of, rock and roll and postmodern electronics. Is a categorization of the music as fusion, but all music's a fusion, and subtly this is the same thing, and as all of these musics are, be it Lyle Mays' music with Pat Metheny, or Don Burroughs, or this quintet from Cuba from 1960. So I wanted to share this record with you today because Emilio is one of those pianists that would definitely be esteemed by jazz lovers. And so keep your eye open for Frank Emilio. He comes out of a tradition that extends to Bibo Valdez and Chucho Valdez, and then ultimately Gonzalo Rubalcaba. So here we have a very interesting quartet from Australia. This is early mid-1960s Australian jazz scene, led by the one and only Don Burroughs Quartet. Don Burroughs, multiple flute and reed player, leading a quartet with George Goll on guitar, Gaston on bass, and John Sangster on vibes and drums, there. The reason I'm bringing this record to your attention is because the Australian scene is somewhat neglected. Obviously it's not a huge scene, but these guys actually take music and influences from the South Pacific, exotica, different jungle elements, and factor them into a very swinging approach that is not only listenable but very durable. And Burroughs himself at points on alto, I wouldn't say is reminiscent of some of the postmodern alto players like Konitz or Paul Desmond. There is a correlation, although the jungle elements bring the phrasing to a different place. But harmonically interesting. Gola is a fine guitarist. It's an atmospheric record. It has a certain flavor that people who are searching for new ways to be outside the pocket might want to consider. So I wanted to bring this record to your attention. This is a Columbia flatback Australian original pressing of a very, very hard record to find. I think it may have had a limited reissue maybe 20 years after it came out. Even that record would probably be very difficult to find as well. Idea here is to think outside the box. There are so many records from all over the world, and you'll find them.